So I've spent the past few days drawing a bunch of my favorite female anime characters and trying to understand what it takes to create a nice and attractive face. And initially I was gonna keep all my findings to myself and hoard them, but I figured I'd share my results and what I learned because I assume at least one person out there will find it helpful. So I compiled all my notes in this video and hopefully you guys enjoy it or find it useful somehow. If so, let me know. So I'm sure most of you have at least heard of the Loomis method, where you draw a circle, flatten off the sides, and divide the face into thirds. And I personally have nothing against the Loomis method, but I find that it's actually better suited for more realistic facial proportions, not so much anime. Most anime/manga have exaggerated facial features that just aren't realistic at all. So if you're trying to draw in that style, I would recommend not having the brow line in the middle of the circle like the typical Loomis method. What you actually want to do is lower it below halfway. How much so depends on your art style and the character you're drawing, but generally anime girls have a lower eyebrow line and bigger forehead than most real-life people. And as you can see here, as I'm drawing Rukia, I'm being cognizant of that. I'm making sure the eyebrow line is below the halfway mark in the circle, and giving her that sort of cat-like look as I draw her chin. Kind of like those memes you see where anime characters are just cats. I guess that sort of applies here. And I'm drawing Rukia in the normal straightforward pose here, so I'm just making sure the eyes, nose, and mouth are all symmetrical. And since I was trying to replicate the Bleach art style, I was paying particular attention to the shape of Rukia's eyes and trying to make sure that it was somewhat similar to the anime. Then I just drew her neck and quickly put in an upper body for her, since I personally don't like drawing floating heads. I just find it weird. But yeah, I just lowered the opacity and drew cleaner details on the new layer. And again, I was making sure her eyes looked similar to the source material and just slapped on some hair. And Rukia's hair really isn't that complicated, so I felt like she made a good warm-up sketch for this little case study of mine. And after coloring the sketch on my computer, I was pretty happy with how it turned out. Now, on to the next girl on the list. We have Boa Hancock, and I drew her here at the 3/4 view, so just slightly turning her head around. And as you could probably tell with the time-lapse, I really struggled with her eyes here. It was like a constant battle of trying to make the eyes look accurate to the One Piece art style while also keeping them in the correct perspective. And it happened after I drew her, but I came up with a good formula on how to draw anime eyes, both male and female. So I included this bonus time-lapse where I'm kind of showing my thought process on how to simplify the eye. And I'm doing so by turning it into basically a hexagon, but if you're anything like me, you probably don't like to draw the eyes with straight lines like that. So I simplified it even further by drawing the upper curve of the eye, then 2 lines on each side of the curve, kind of going inward. Then you just connect the bottom part of the eye, which basically leaves you with a sort of almond shape. Now, as for the length and curviness of each line, that's going to really depend on your art style and the particular character you're drawing. And it's also worth noting that if you want to avoid same face syndrome, then playing around with these eye shapes can really help out with that. And as you can see here, I imported some pictures of a few more anime girls to show how my almond method can be applied to each one of their eyes. It's basically just adjusting the length, width, and curviness of the almond shape. Like as you can see with Bochi, she has much more circular eyes compared to Jolene, who has sharper, more cat-like eyes. So anyway, regarding my Boa Hancock drawing, you know, I think she looks pretty, but I was pretty underwhelmed with the result because I felt like it didn't match the One Piece art style. If I had to go back and redo it, I would probably play around with her facial features a bit more, maybe adjust the size of her eyes and make her hair less messy. But overall, I'm not going to beat myself up about it. I think it was a solid attempt. Now, moving on to the next drawing, we have Makima in a higher point of view, kind of like we're looking down at her. Now, this is definitely a trickier angle, and the thing I had to keep in mind here is that all the facial features are now going to follow the same high angle perspective of the head. And it took a few tries, but I think I managed to plot in some nice almond-shaped Makima eyes and make the face pretty believable. Also, something to keep in mind is that since Makima's face is tilted down a bit, her ear is actually going to be above her eyes. And if you're anything like me, you probably don't put much thought as to where each ear is going to be, especially if you're drawing characters with longer hair, because you're like, oh, the hair is going to cover the ears anyway, so I don't need to focus on them as much. And admittedly, that's a habit I'm trying to break out of right now, but you know, it's important not to forget the ears and show them the proper love they deserve. And also, another quick note, you gotta make sure the strands of hair that you draw follow the correct perspective, or else the physics of the hair could seem weird and uncanny. And to be honest, that's something I probably should have spent more time focusing on when I drew Makima's hair. I think I could have drawn the hair strands a little more accurately with the high angle perspective. But overall, I was pleased with the result, and I think she looks like Makima. Now, in these next two drawings, I implemented another method that I recently picked up. And I'm not sure if this has a name or not, but I like to call it the mask method. And essentially what you want to do is sketch out the face with an oval shape and kind of imagine it like a mask. And once you have your oval, put in a horizontal line to denote the eyebrow line of the character you're drawing. And from there, you can add the cranium to the back of it and attach the neck at the bottom. And as you can see in the time-lapse, I made the cranium a pink circle behind my oval and just inserted the neck underneath it. Now for this drawing, I chose Rias because I feel like the high school DxD, I feel like the high school DxD art style is pretty unique, at least amongst the other anime I've seen. You know, like compared to Chainsaw Man and Bleach, the girls in high school DxD tend to have bigger eyes and pupils. So when I was carving out the chin from the initial oval I drew, I was trying to make sure that her face more or less matched how it looked in the series. Now, to be honest, I kind of rushed this drawing. I feel like I could have made the mask a bit more symmetrical as well as make her hair less messy. You know, Rias has so many strands of hair on her and I felt like I was being lazy drawing all of it. But considering this sketch took me like under an hour to make, I would say the final piece turned out pretty good considering the short amount of time it took, at least for me. And that's definitely something I like about the mask method. You know, I feel like there's less brain power involved compared to the Loomis method, but at the same time, you can still dish out believable faces with it. Now, the main reason why I'm loving this method so much as of late is because there are just some angles of the human body where the Loomis method really isn't practical, at least in my opinion. You know, if you're anything like me, you probably tend to draw your character starting with the head and then just go down from there into the body. But sometimes when you want to draw more extreme angles, drawing the head first probably isn't in your best interest. And by extension, it can be very hard to map out where the Loomis head is going to be. And that's where this mask method can really come in handy. Now for this final example, I drew Meiko from Prison School because I like her titties. Now, as you can see, I started this sketch by drawing a torso at a more extreme lower angle. And I know it's not perfect, I just wanted something that'll get the point across. So after I finished the torso, I started sketching in my oval mask thing above it. Now, when I drew Rias, that was in a front view, but here, we're looking at her from a lower angle, so everything is going to be much more curved. And we're really going to see the bottom part of that mask. Basically where the bottom of the skull is. Now, drawing in the facial features was a bit tough, mainly because I had to make sure everything was in the correct low angle perspective. But after a few tries, I ended up with a satisfactory result. And again, we may not see the ear much, but I made sure to put them below the eyes since we're seeing the head at a lower angle this time. And the bottom of the jaw was also a bit tricky to draw. I just sort of imagined it like a horseshoe shape, or maybe a triangle if your character has a pointy chin. But yeah, after I mapped out the face into something I felt was believable, I just added on her hair and glasses, also keeping in mind that those two things need to follow the correct perspective as well. And speaking of correct perspective, her titties were quite annoying to draw here. It definitely took me a few tries to come up with something I thought was decent, but overall, once I finished the sketch and colored it in, I was pretty happy with the result. It took me about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours to make, and it's definitely not perfect. I still think I need to refine my face mapping a bit, and I think the neck is not in the correct perspective either. But as someone who draws comics on a daily basis, I think that if I were to add this picture of Meiko here to one of my panels, it probably would get the job done and not break any immersion. And to be fair, I only very recently picked up this mask method. The inspiration for it actually came from a Cynic's design video that I watched, so shout out to him. But yeah, I'm definitely gonna keep practicing this method and hone my skills with it, as it's been very useful so far. But guys, I want to ask you, for all you artists watching this, do you always draw your character's face first no matter what angle it is? Or are you more like me, where it depends on the angle or perspective? And also let me know what strategies you guys use to map out trickier face angles. You know, I'm curious how other people go about it. And also, as thank you for making it to the end of this video, here is a picture of Bochi the Rock I drew at work. She looks very cute on my desk and keeps me company. Other than that, follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Peace.